If someone were to ask you to summarize Submachine 6 The Edge, what would you say? If somebody wanted to know what the player does to get to the end of the game, what would you tell that person? If you had the same thoughts as me after the first time I played the game, you probably would have said something like this. In Submachine 6, the player continues his or her mission from Murtaugh to visit the Edge and investigate the defense systems. The player spends the rest of the game hacking into the defense systems under orders from Murtaugh. Then the player succeeds only to realize that Murtaugh had used the player for his own gain to get into the core, and he leaves the player to die in the mainframe. After all, that's what happened, right? That was the overall goal, that we were sent here to disable the defense systems so Murtaugh could invade the core. I titled my video of my Sub-6 playthrough with the single word betrayal, meant to signify the sudden hopelessness that the player feels after realizing that there is no certain escape route for them. And that's clearly the main story. So that must be what happened in the game, and that must be the final result. Well, today I'm here to tell you that what we believe to have been the player's journey in Submachine 6 The Edge is a lie. Greetings, comrades. Jotsko here with another long-anticipated episode of Beating the Machine, and by anticipated I mean anticipated by both some devout Submachine fans and myself alike. And in the last and first episode of BTM, I shared with you my suspicions about the apparently red portal in the infernal basement of Submachine 10 actually being a red karma portal, using the power of physics. And I'm so glad I decided to stay a physics major for 2 semesters instead of 1 during my first year of college. See, those are practical uses for what you can learn in school. And guess what? The theory actually turned out to be true. Matu Skutnik, the developer, wrote back to me in a forum post that the karma portal is indeed red. And not only that, but everything in the infernal basement is actually colored red and not just lit up that way because of the red lights. What a pleasant surprise that was. Anyway, the last episode of BTM was made without any sort of formal script, just to be sort of a little taste test of what is to come in this series. And now I feel confident to move forward with a full-fledged theory on some of the things that we see, or we think we see, in Submachine 6. This video will be similar in style to my theory videos on the game Nai-Sansei, except not nearly as long, I hope. I'm still writing the script at this point with no idea where it'll end up, so bear with me. It also relies heavily on some things that could be perceived very well as what I'll call development boundaries, where I draw conclusions based on technical things about the game which probably were never involved at suggesting any part of the story. And as a result, this theory isn't based so much on actual game content as it is exploring details of the game mechanics and how they could possibly contribute to the story if we try to take a different perspective on them. So let's get started so you can see what I mean. First off, let's start with the notes that are found in Submachine 6, left by a displaced explorer just like us who seemingly found a piece or two of the puzzle that we didn't. The explorer known as the 6th predecessor, or the Jumper by hardcore theorists, due to the fact that this explorer eventually leapt to his death in the mountain location of Submachine Universe. The note's primary purpose is to dispel any thought that the player was a unique individual who passed Murtaugh's tests and was sent to collect wisdom gems in Submachine 5. We know from playing through the game that the Jumper knew that multiple people had followed the same exact route that the player had followed ever since the beginning of Submachine 4, the lab. The Jumper had left us a note to find which says, quote, "Did he tell you that you were the first one sent out here? Well, newsflash, my friend. We also can uncover a secret in which the Jumper says that there were, quote, at least 5 people before me, and as hard as it might be to hear, you have to hear this. Just as I wasn't the first here, you probably won't be the last," end quote. The Jumper knew all along about the truth that no one sent out here was unique. What's even more interesting is that the Jumper knew that someone had followed Murtaugh's message in the system to disable the system protocols. The original message from Murtaugh has the player disable the following protocols: 2-18 for the secondary defense system, 1-12 for the primary DS, and 1-0 for the mainframe. And the Jumper leaves another note for us to find that says, quote, "Do not mess with the protocols," assuming these are the protocols that were talked about before. If you do, they will lock you up inside, and I've seen that happening before, end quote. We can assume that either a subbot or something similar to a subbot, perhaps even a turret from the turret chain, captured or killed some of the other explorers and took them away somewhere else, never to be seen again. This means that the message we unblocked wasn't meant for us specifically, rather it was for anybody who happened to make it that far. And the message is clear. Murtaugh didn't think that the player was special, and the player had only been part of a bigger scheme that involved multiple individuals all along. Yeah, but Jotsko, anyone who played the game and found all the secrets would have been able to draw the same conclusions. Everyone already knows everything that you just said. And that is true. Don't worry, the story is only getting started. The busting of the myth that the player was the only one sent for the job is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's bust another common thought about Submachine 6. The thought that we disabled the defense system so that Murtaugh can access the core. Now, you're probably saying, Jotsko, what are you talking about? That was the whole point of the game, so we could disable those defense systems so that Murtaugh could get in. That's exactly what happened. And I'm here to tell you that this is not true. We didn't open the defenses for Murtaugh to get to the core. This is what I'm going to prove. And there's one piece of evidence to support this that we never saw because we never actually saw it, or at least something was supposed to happen that we never did see. And that piece of evidence is proven by looking at Protocol 54-1. Now, Protocol 54-1 is a system protocol that controls the outcomes of all the other protocols in the 54-N series, which deal specifically with human hack attempts. Now, the second in the series controls the firewalls that block messages from outside the system. The third controls the access to the elevator graphs, and the fourth controls the access to the subnet infestation map. But the first one is the most important as it is designed to send out an automatic alert if any of the next three are tampered with. Even without tampering with the protocols, just by looking at the screen in the system, we see information that the system has detected our connection pod and has read it as a human hack attempt. So the system should already be dealing with us by sending out subbots to take us away, or firing at us with the turret chain. They certainly would be notified as soon as we actually turned off any of the protocols, but nothing actually happens. So what gives? Why is the system failing to do its job? This is where the phrase that I used earlier comes into play. We've hit a quote-unquote development boundary. Do we really expect Matuskutnik to include fully fledged subbots coming after us and capturing us in this game, or a turret chain to focus a laser light on us and just pick us off? That's almost certainly what would happen if we were ever to be detected. But no, of course we don't expect him to code that for a game. So it's something that wasn't intended to affect the story of the game, but we could use it to help explain the story anyway and treat the absence of subbots as a sign that the system is broken. Now, what would break the system so badly that it wouldn't realize it should take care of a human hack attempt? Well, let's answer that with another slightly different question. What if the system didn't recognize the attempt in the first place? The answer to this can only be the human recognition pattern, which is only accessible in the primary defense system. If that is wiped out, then the system wouldn't know how to act in the case of seeing a human. Even if it still had protocols and devices that served to detect human activity, it wouldn't actually be able to do anything. So that must be what happened. Someone else, who is not the player, disabled the primary defense system before us and erased the human recognition pattern, going straight to the mainframe. Once that was done, they were likely congratulated by Murtaugh just like we were, and then left to wander the rest of their days in the edge. But Jotsko, we saw the human recognition pattern before we disabled the mainframe too, so it couldn't have been deleted. Remember the huge patterns of ones and zeros that we saw? Yes, I do. And let me ask you a question. Does it make sense that the human recognition pattern, the code or whatever subbots and the defense system uses to recognize a human being, does it make sense that it would just be a code of seemingly random ones and zeros? No, it does not. If I were to think of a way to identify humans, a string of ones and zeros wouldn't mean anything to me. Humans aren't built out of ones and zeros, as far as I know. Humans are made of some sort of organic matter. How would a string of binary code identify a living, breathing person? And in this case, it doesn't. The code doesn't signify a complete human genetic code or a heat signature to look for or anything like that. The box that we find this human recognition pattern in may be labeled human recognition pattern, but the actual content of the box, it's just a binary translation of the phrase human recognition pattern tracking device PR. So what we basically did was delete a file or program that just contained the name of the file or program, nothing with actual substance. The human recognition pattern we deleted wasn't actually a pattern at all, and the real pattern, in whatever form it took, maybe it was deleted before by somebody else. However, since we still reset the file, the gate to protocol 1-0 still opened up for us, and we quote-unquote shut down the defense system for the second time. Any protocols we experienced throughout the game, any puzzles related to the system, were probably just automatic procedures, maybe after the system did a timed restart in safe mode or something like that. It retained its basic functions and methods, but without any programs to back them up and give them substance. And if you're still not convinced, ask yourself this. Immediately after we shut down the entire defense system, we are greeted by the famous betrayal message left by Murtaugh. The message has no characteristic green interlaced background that the system shows. No 1s and 0s in green grid boxes or anything like that. This is not the defense system operating, and the only other thing it can be is the connection pod itself. Now, as far as the connection pod is concerned, I'm not exactly sure how we are able to see everything that the connection pod is working in the system. What I'm assuming is there's some sort of lens on like the bulbular part of the connection pod that we can look through as sort of like a microscope or whatever, and we can see some sort of like green lines and stuff. I don't know exactly how it works. Anyway, we can see this message. Murtaugh left this message here for us in the pod to play automatically after we shut down the defense system. Then it ejects itself with automatic commands from the terminal without the system's help. So if we didn't disable the defense systems, this is the big question that you must be asking after I say this, then who did? Was it one of the previous explorers who would have maybe managed to escape through the ventilation shaft just like we did? I think I have the answer. Well, I'm just kidding. This is all wild speculation now. We're getting into even wilder territory. And it lies in another secret note, which is left by the jumper. For those of you who don't know, Maunsell has confirmed that the jumper did leave all of the notes in Submachine 6, and also left the suicide note that we found in the mountain location in Submachine Universe. It's all the same person. And the note that I want to look at says this. It's a secret one. I never thought that playing Murtaugh's game would lead me here. I never thought I'd have to make a choice. I was just following his orders. Right now it's too late for me to change sides. So what is this choice that's being discussed here? Before now, the secret note never made too much sense, but I always thought that I knew the basic reason for why it was written. Whoever wrote it was working under Murtaugh, and the person had a choice to keep playing Murtaugh's game and sticking with Murtaugh's team, or just to leave all of it behind. The person would probably not have been able to change sides, because to do so would be to leave oneself without some sort of guidance from Murtaugh, however twisted it may be, which in the subnet automatically guarantees certain death because Murtaugh, even though he's sorta crazy, is the only one that sorta knows what's going on. I was trying to think if this note applied to any recognizable situation in particular when I had a thought. Let's return to the end of the game. The pod ejects and the power goes out, and we feel like a death sentence has been placed on our heads. That is, until we find the ventilation shaft and follow it up to the final edge portal, which is sitting all by itself on a lonely platform. So the way forward is pretty clear. We have to insert the pod into the edge portal, which leads directly to the sanctuary in Sub 7. Otherwise, if we stay behind, we die a slow and lonely death. What if this, right here, either going or staying, is the choice talked about in the note? If we go forward, we are continuing to follow Murtaugh, maybe as part of his invasion crew if we're early enough, and if we don't, we pay the price of certain death, just by waiting out the rest of our lives. The choice is there, and if we pick one, we'll never be able to go back and choose again. We know that the jumper left this note, and when he says, right now it's too late for me to change sides, maybe this is what he was talking about. His decision to not take the portal, to stop playing Murtaugh's game, led him to spend the rest of his life in the cliffs in a move that he could never take back. Now you're gonna ask, how was he able to escape that flat platform with the portal and make it back down to the cliffs? I'm not exactly sure, but perhaps he found a way that we couldn't see on screen. But if this is true, then the sequence of events goes something like this. The jumper disabled the defense system and opened up the door for Murtaugh to invade the sanctuary. The jumper was the one to do this. We were not. But the jumper opted out by paying with the rest of his life. Sometime later, the defense system restarted, but in a badly broken state, and the player, or us, we just did it again with much less trouble. Our purpose for playing the game has been completely uprooted. The big concepts that we thought that we were fighting for in the end didn't matter. Everything that we thought we did had been done before us, and that is the true story, ladies and gentlemen, of Submachine 6, The Edge. But let's not stop there. Let's dig a little bit deeper with this phrase that I used before, the development boundary. For example, it's always bugged me that in the beginning of the game, when we punch in our personal IDN code in the lobby, that we never ever get the correct answer. By the way, just so you guys know, this is not necessarily theorizing right now, this is just complete speculation. No real evidence to back this up at all. Well, the basic reasoning for the PIDN code is simple. Maunsell doesn't want us to get the right answer. He's making us do an impossible puzzle so that we get sent to the cliffs. To be more specific, the number of 4-digit combinations that could be taken from the grid, assuming that we can only up each 0 to 1 and not be able to change a 1 once it's been deleted, is 303,600 possible combinations. For sense of scale, if you gathered a group of 120 people, for example the entire dedicated Submachine fandom, on day 1 of the Submachine 6 release, which was September 27th, 2009, and had them each play Sub 6 once a day, everyone trying a new combination on that grid, we would have tried all the possible combinations by the time we reached this video's script conception 7 years later on September 7th, 2016. Feel free to correct me in the comments below if you got a different number of possible combinations, that's totally fine. So Matu Skutnik, anyway, he makes this puzzle to steer us in a certain direction because he doesn't want to make a game where two paths are available from the start, even if one is almost impossible to unlock. And it makes sense because then he might have had to develop two completely different games. It's a perfect example of what I would call a development boundary, something that's not meant to hint at the plot and just means that the developer's life is made a bit easier. However, being the over-analytical theorist that I am, I want to propose the idea that in the game itself, development aside, that the PIDN graph, the impossible graph, was actually meant to be impossible in the game. That would mean that the player was supposed to be sent down to the cliffs no matter which combo was entered. Remember, this is not Matus's programming thing. This doesn't have anything to do with that. Like, this puzzle in the game itself, in the game lore, was actually meant to be unsolvable. And I guess it's a good thing that we did end up down in the cliffs because we were revealed the world of the sixth predecessor, the jumper who I believe worked behind the scenes and did all the work for us prior to us even stepping foot into a mover. We were warned of the dirty work that Murtaugh had done to his explorers, though if you had talked to Murtaugh about it himself, you probably would have had a different perspective on the dirty work and called it something else. And we were warned about the defense systems and the power that they had the potential to hold. It's where we find the tunnels that hold all of the notes that tell us of what is to come. So am I saying that the jumper planned us to find his trail? Am I saying that he somehow maybe rewired the personal IDN device so that it always returned an invalid combo? Well, not necessarily, but if that were the case, I believe that he would have been the person to do it. He's had time to explore the cliffs more than anyone else that we know. Maybe he did orchestrate some sort of way to get us to fall into his hands after all. That's all the speculation I'm going to do here. I think I've fleshed out my major points well enough. One note that I would like to include, I don't think there's any clear evidence that the jumper is male or female. I've just referenced to the jumper as he for this video, mostly because I've been putting myself into his shoes so much in order to come up with my conclusions. So there you have it, my complete thoughts about why we've been misled this whole time to believe the quote-unquote real story behind Submachine 6. Does it make sense to you? Are there parts that you disagree with? If so, let me know in the comments below and I'll gladly talk to you about it. Submachine 6 turned out to be one of the most interesting games in the series for me that I've played because I've been able to dig into so many interesting ideas founded on good evidence or not. And while these are my opinions on the story, the edge itself and how it relates to the rest of the subnet and the core still has some key questions that need to be answered. But that's another video for another time. In the meantime, thank you all for watching. All comments are very much appreciated and I hope to see you again sometime down the road. Bye bye.